hello everyone. This is Fadi, and we want to welcome all of you back to a continuation of a video series that we're doing with Mel concerning the origin of the name Muhammad. Today, we are going to take yet another deeper look at how the name Muhammad was used. And with that in mind, we welcome Brother Mel to elaborate further on other usages of that term. Mel, thank you so much for everything that you've shared so far, and we're eager to hear from you about today's basically focus.
Well, it's great to be back. So today we're going to be looking at the use of a cross on an inscription by Muawiyah, who Islamic tradition would probably paint as a Muslim. It looks very much like he was a Christian, or at least very sympathetic to Christianity. Maybe he was a Christian heretic, but it looks very much like he's a Christian, as we'll see. We have a very interesting 7th century source called the Mosaic Chronicle, and it does seem to refer to Mahmud's throne, and I used to think that maybe it's referring to either Medina or Mecca, but when I looked into it, it seems that that isn't the case, and we're still on solid ground in relation to Mahmud being a reference to Jesus. So without further ado, let's take a look at Muawiyah's inscription. So we can see here at the beginning of the inscription, there's a clear cross at the beginning, and it refers to Muawiyah as Ma'aviyah, okay, which I believe is Greek. Most of this is written in Greek, and some of the Arabic terms have been transliterated for us. So we have Ma'aviyah, servant of God, and Amir al-Mu'minin, commander of the believers. Now, at first glance, you might think, oh, there's evidence that of Islam. But actually, Abdul Allah and Abdul Mu'minin are very generic. There's nothing specifically Islamic about those. Servant of God could be used by Christians as much as Muslims. Commander of the believers, again, is very vague. There's nothing particularly specific there. If we look at this dispassionately, this would suggest that Muawiyah was a Christian. Why would he have a cross at the beginning? He doesn't have to. The other thing to point out as well is that Muawiyah seems to have borrowed the name from a previous Arab ruler called Queen Mavia, and she was a Christian as well. So I would argue that it looks like he was a Christian, but there's also other evidence, as we'll see in a moment, from the Mosaic Chronicle that supports this impression that he's a Christian. So the Mosaic Chronicle was written a few years after the story that it's referring to is written in 664 and is referring to 660, so it's contemporary, so a very good source. It says, many Arabs gathered at Jerusalem and made Muawiyah king. Notice he was made king in Jerusalem, not Mecca, not Medina. And he went up and sat down on Golgotha. He prayed there and went to Gethsemane and went down to the tomb of the Blessed Mary to pray in it. Look at all the important Christian sites: Golgotha, where Jesus was crucified; Gethsemane, where Jesus prayed before the day he was crucified; and also the tomb of Jesus' mother. All of those things, if you were looking at it without any other context, you would have to assume that we're talking about a Christian here and not a Muslim. It also goes on to say, he placed his throne in Damascus and refused to go to Mahmud's throne. Now, the puzzle comes with the reference to Mahmud's throne. This could possibly mean he refused to rule from Jerusalem, Mahmud's throne. He was made king in Jerusalem, but he chose to rule from Damascus. And that's the interpretation I'm going to suggest for this. But how does Jesus have a throne in Jerusalem? In what sense? Now, I'm going to argue that when Jesus was crucified, his cross was his throne. And there's a bit of mystical theology involved in this that would have been easy for a 7th century Christian to get, but unfortunately we've lost that sense. So it took a little bit of investigation to recover that meaning. Before we go forward, Ala, do you want to comment on any of that?
I mean, just fascinating to me that we find someone by the name Muawiyah, whom I grew up believing he was one of the caliphs for basically the Umayyads, and he's the founder of the Umayyad dynasty, and yet he is actually using a cross and he's associated with a queen and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of fascinating.
Yeah, it's very hard to see how the standard Islamic narrative fits with these early sources. Like these are really early contemporary sources.
Yeah, these are
Um,
real
yeah,
inscriptions, real documentations, right?
yeah. This is not someone's interpretation centuries later who've never met Muawiyah and assume that he's a Muslim. This is
Yeah.
actually people who lived in his time. So let's investigate this Mahmud's throne, because actually this is the key thing. We need to see, is it referring to Jesus here or is it referring to an Arabian prophet? So let's investigate. Under the terms of the Old Covenant, the mercy seat was the top of the Ark of the Covenant. Okay, the Ark of the Covenant, you can see the box there, that is the Ark of the Covenant. And it represented the place where the invisible God sat to dispense mercy to his sinful people. Okay, so you imagine God sat on that seat
Right.
and then gave his mercy to his people. So I hope that makes sense. So in a sense, if that's God's mercy seat, you could also say it's God's throne. Okay. Now for Christians believe Jesus is God, so therefore this would be um, Muhammad's throne, if Muhammad means the Messiah or Jesus. Okay. Now, if we look at Leviticus 16:2, the key bit there, tell your brother Aaron that he is not to come whenever he chooses into the most holy place behind the curtain in front of the atonement cover on the ark, or else he will die. For I will appear in the cloud over the atonement cover. So the high priest made atonement at the mercy seat, and this should be familiar to many viewers, I'm sure. Only the high priest could enter the most holy place and approach the mercy seat, and only once a year to make atonement by God's decree for himself and for the sins of the people. Okay?
Mhm.
Now, I'm going to argue that the cross figuratively is the mercy seat. On the cross at Golgotha, Jesus made atonement as the high priest for the sins of many. So the mercy seat in the temple was like a prefigurement of that.
Right.
Okay? So it was just figuratively cross there. The cross was thus figuratively the mercy seat. The mercy seat is his throne, therefore Golgotha, where the cross is Mahmed's throne. And further to that, if we look at Matthew's gospel there, we can see verse 37 that when Jesus was on the cross, which I'm going to argue was his throne, above his head they placed the written charge against him. This is Jesus, the King of the Jews. So there's a reference to his kingship on the cross as well. So I think that's how Christians interpreted Golgotha. That was for them when they reflected on the old mercy seat that was in the temple, and how Jesus replaced that with his death on the cross. You could see how Christians could say, well, Golgotha is really the Messiah's throne, or to use another term, Mahmed's throne. So if we look then back to what we said a little bit earlier, if we go back to the Maronite Chronicle, when it says that Muawiyah placed his throne in Damascus and refused to go to Mahmed's throne, what it's really referring to is that he was made king in Jerusalem, but refused to set up his throne there. He wanted to rule from Damascus, probably because that's what he associated with. He was an Arab, but he also viewed himself as very much Assyrian as well, in particular. So that's how I would decode that very puzzling passage from the Maronite Chronicle. I think it reinforces the idea that we saw in the last couple of episodes, that Mahmed was very clearly referring to Jesus and not to anyone else. So,
Right, and
hand it
it
back to
makes
you.
sense. It makes sense. Why would Muawiyah choose Damascus, not Mecca, not Medina? to be his headquarters or his capital. I mean, it just never made any sense. And then the Abbasides chose Baghdad. I mean, my goodness. So what is wrong with Mecca and Medina? I mean, I thought that's where Islam started. That's where Muhammad was buried. That's where everything, basically began for Islam in general. And if these are prominent caliphs representing the same faith, why would they distance themselves from the place of origin?
Yeah. Like you would have thought that if he was a Muslim, would you not expect that he would want to be crowned way down in either Medina or Mecca? I think it's
Absolutely.
unimaginable. It's unimaginable that he would want to be crowned in Jerusalem. Why would he do that if he's
I mean,
Muslim?
Mel, you have millions and hundreds of millions of Muslims that wish to go to Mecca to visit the place. Imagine if any of them will get a chance to even rule the Islamic world. Mecca will be the first place for them to choose because they want to be affiliated with their founder, affiliated with the origin of their religion they are passionate about, and the place where it's called the Haram, or the holy, mosque, holy area, technically speaking, and so on and so forth. But I've always wondered, why Damascus, why Baghdad? What is up with that? I mean, what's wrong with this idea? And of course, the answer is like, oh, well, because they expanded. But it sounds like he founded his caliphate right there. It's the other way around. I mean, it's not like he moved from Medina and said, oh, because we're expanding, I'm going to just move my headquarters somehow.
Yeah, no, it was very much, all the action was happening up north. I think the thoughts of going down to a desert area with hardly any water wouldn't have been very appealing. And you can see what he's devoted to. He's devoted to Christ. It's really clear he's devoted to Christ. He must believe in the story of Jesus. Why would he sit down in Golgotha where Jesus died? Why would he want to be in the place that Jesus prayed and cried the night before he was crucified? I can't understand it in any other way than he was some form of Christian. He could possibly have not been the most orthodox. He could have been a heretical Christian, but he has some sort of Christian beliefs, and the fact that he's also honoring Mary as well, because of her being the mother of Jesus, again would suggest that he's a Christian. I don't see any signs of him being a Muslim there.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Mel. I'm looking forward, of course, to the next episode where I believe we're going to talk about both Muhammad and Ahmad in the Quran, and if it was referring to Jesus or to Muhammad. Thank you again. Thank you, everyone. This is Fadi over now. God bless.